In the year 1096, a Viking colony in Greenland faced certain death, not from battle, not from disease, but from refusing to eat what was all around them until they had no choice. What you're about to discover will shatter everything you think you know about Viking food. The truth is stranger than any saga ever written. Here's what popular culture tells us. Vikings were savage warriors who tore into roasted meat with their bare hands. They drank nothing but mead. They lived on hunted game and whatever they could plunder. But here's what historians didn't tell you. The archaeological evidence reveals something shocking. Viking societies had a diet that was heavily plant-based. They consumed more dairy products than almost any civilization in history. And their most prized food wasn't meat at all. The real Viking diet was so different from what we imagine that modern nutritionists call it nearly perfect. Some experts say it rivals the best athletic diets created today. So what were Vikings really eating? How did their food choices help them survive the harshest environments on Earth? And why did some Viking settlements literally die rather than change their eating habits? The answers will change everything you thought you knew about the Norse. The Viking Age lasted roughly 300 years. From around 800 to 1100 AD, Norse explorers spread from Scandinavia across Europe, into Russia, and even to North America. But here's the critical thing most people miss. Viking wasn't an ethnicity. It was a profession. It meant raider or pirate. Most Norse people never went Viking at all. They were farmers, fishermen, and traders. These farmers faced a brutal challenge. Much of Scandinavia had poor soil and freezing temperatures. Denmark had some decent farmland, but Norway, Sweden, and Iceland, the growing season was short. Winters were long and deadly. This environment shaped everything about their food culture. Norse people ate twice daily. The morning meal was called dagverður. The evening meal, nattverður. Between these meals, they worked, they farmed, they fished, they explored, and the food they ate had to fuel incredible physical demands. Archaeological studies reveal something fascinating. Viking skeletal remains show teeth worn down to the gums. Even in young people, they were chewing grain so tough and fibrous that it literally ground their teeth away. This tells us two things. First, their diet was grain-heavy. Second, they didn't waste anything. Every kernel mattered. An ancient poem called Rigs Thula describes exactly what different social classes ate. Common people ate bread that was heavy and brown and stuffed with husks. The wealthy? Their bread was slim and white, probably made from imported wheat. This wasn't just about taste. It was about survival versus luxury. Poor Vikings ate whatever their harsh land could produce. Rich Vikings could afford to import food from warmer climates. How do we know what Vikings really ate? Scientists use several methods. First, they dig through middens, ancient garbage pits. These contain discarded animal bones, fish bones, and shells. Second, they analyze cesspits. Yes, ancient toilets. Seeds from vegetables and fruits survive digestion. They found evidence of cabbage, onions, garlic, leeks, turnips, peas, beans, even cucumber and rhubarb. Third, they study cooking tools and storage containers. These reveal how food was prepared and preserved. Fourth, they analyze human bones and teeth using stable isotopes. This creates a chemical signature that shows exactly what protein sources someone relied on. The results? They're about to surprise you. Here's the shocking truth that emerged from cesspits and garbage dumps across Scandinavia. Fish, not meat. Fish was the cornerstone of the Viking diet. Archaeological evidence shows fish bones in extreme abundance at Viking sites. Cod, herring, plaice, halibut, salmon, trout. The long Scandinavian coastline provided endless fishing opportunities. Vikings caught fish, dried them, traded them, and brought them inland to communities far from the sea. But here's what makes this truly fascinating. Vikings developed a preservation technique that changed maritime history. They created stockfish, cod that was dried in the open air without salt. This dried fish could last for months or even years without spoiling. Stockfish became currency. It fueled long ocean voyages, it fed armies, and it made some Vikings very wealthy through trade. While fish provided protein, grains provided energy. Barley was found at the majority of excavation sites across Scandinavia. This hardy grain could survive the short growing season. Vikings used barley to make 3 essential items: bread, porridge, and beer. An Icelandic saga from the 13th century tells of Vikings at Harald Hardrada's court grumbling when served porridge instead of a feast. But their hard king said, "With butter, it is the best of dishes." This wasn't just talk. Porridge with butter was likely a daily staple. Simple, calorie-dense, filling. Other grains appeared too: rye, oats, and in Denmark, some wheat. Now we come to something truly surprising. Vikings consumed massive amounts of dairy. Milk from cows, sheep, and goats played a pivotal role in Norse life, but they rarely drank fresh milk. Instead, they transformed it. Milk was stored in large vats until the cream rose to the top. The cream was skimmed off to make butter. The remaining milk continued to ferment into skyr, a cultured dairy product similar to yogurt. Skyr was thick, protein-rich, and it could be stored for long periods without refrigeration. The whey left over from making skyr wasn't wasted either. Vikings drank it for protein, and there's evidence they used whey as an acid for preserving meats. Butter was so valuable that archaeologists have found butter hoards, buried caches of preserved butter, suggesting it was a form of wealth. This heavy dairy consumption had a biological effect. Peoples from Scandinavia today have some of the best lactose tolerance globally. The Vikings who could digest dairy thrived. Those who couldn't, they struggled. This is where the biggest misconception gets shattered. Remember how popular culture shows Vikings as pure carnivores? Wrong. Viking societies had a diet that was heavily plant-based. Every farmstead had a kitchen garden called a kal garth. Viking women cultivated hardy vegetables that could survive harsh conditions. Archaeological analysis reveals the variety: cabbage, onions, garlic, leeks, turnips, peas, sunfisar beans, and even goosefoot, a leafy plant similar to kale. These vegetables were often combined into a hearty stew called skaus, a one-pot meal that was likely a cornerstone of everyday eating. Vikings also foraged wild plants, berries, fruits, seaweed. Depending on the season, meals could include a diverse assortment of foraged foods. They spiced things up with locally grown herbs: dill, parsley, coriander, mustard seeds, juniper berries, and malt vinegar. Vikings wanted their food to taste good. These herbs and vegetables made mealtimes pleasurable, not just functional. So if Vikings ate all this fish, dairy, and vegetables, when did they eat meat? Here's the truth. Meat was exceptional, not every day. For common Vikings, meat appeared mainly at feasts, celebrations, or important events. The daily menu consisted mainly of groats, boiled cereals, bread, and dairy products. But the type of meat consumed tells us a lot about Viking culture. Pigs were kept specifically for their meat. Pork was the most popular meat when it was available. Cattle, sheep, and goats were usually kept alive for dairy production. Slaughtering them for meat meant losing their milk, butter, and cheese. And here's something that would shock modern sensibilities. Horse meat was common, likely served as kebabs. Horse meat graced many Viking tables. Vikings also hunted wild game when possible: deer, elk, wild boar, birds. Meat was prepared in simple ways: stewed, boiled on the bone to make soup and feed more people, or roasted on a spit. One cooking practice reveals a lot about Viking daily life. Many households maintained a stew that simmered for days. It would be in a state of constant renewal, topped up with whatever meat and vegetables were available. You'd eat from it at nattverður in the evening, then add more ingredients for tomorrow. This pot rarely went cold. This wasn't lazy cooking. It was brilliant resource management. Nothing was wasted. Flavors built over time, and you always had a hot meal ready. Modern nutritionists have analyzed the typical Viking diet. The breakdown? Roughly 30 to 35% protein, 35 to 40% energy-supplying fats, and 30% carbohydrates. This formula is very similar to what top bodybuilders today consider optimal for extreme growth and performance. The Vikings weren't just surviving. They were thriving on a diet that modern science recognizes as nearly ideal. High protein from fish and dairy built strong muscles and bones. Healthy fats from butter, fish oils, and meat provided sustained energy for long days of physical labor. Complex carbohydrates from whole grains powered their incredible endurance. Now here's something crucial to understand. Foods we consider essential to European cuisine today didn't exist in the Viking world. No potatoes, no tomatoes, no chili peppers, no corn, no chocolate, no vanilla. All of these are indigenous to the Americas. They didn't reach Europe until the 1500s, 400 years after the Viking Age ended. No turkey, either. That's a New World bird. This means every image you've seen of Vikings feasting on certain foods is historically wrong. Their diet came entirely from Europe, Scandinavia, and the North Atlantic. Surviving harsh Scandinavian winters required genius-level food preservation. Vikings developed 4 primary preservation methods. First, drying. Fish and meats were dried in open air. The cold, dry climate of Scandinavia was perfect for this. Dried foods could last for months. Second, salting. Salt was used to cure meat and fish, inhibiting bacterial growth. Third, smoking. Vikings would hang meats or fish in smokehouses. Smoke enveloped the food, creating a barrier against spoilage. Smoked herring became a staple. Fourth, fermenting. Fermented foods like sauerkraut and pickled herring could be stored for long periods. The fermentation process actually made nutrients more bioavailable. Beyond preservation techniques, Vikings developed clever storage methods. They utilized natural cool storage. Burying food in the ground where temperatures stayed low kept it fresh longer. They stored food in wooden barrels. These were ideal for fermented and salted items. For grains, Vikings used large pits dug into the ground and covered to keep contents dry and protected from vermin. Now we come to one of the most shocking stories in Viking food history. When Vikings settled Greenland around 985 AD, they brought their traditional farming culture with them. They raised cattle, sheep, goats. They produced milk, butter, and cheese. But Greenland's environment was brutal. Farming was incredibly difficult. The wealthy could afford to slaughter livestock for meat, but most Greenlanders couldn't waste their dairy animals. So what did they eat instead? They hunted caribou, walrus, seal, whale, seabirds, even polar bear. They almost certainly ate cod as well. But here's where it gets tragic. As centuries passed, Greenland's climate grew even harsher. Livestock became unsustainable. Little by little, cattle and their products vanished from the Greenlander diet. Tooth analysis demonstrates something shocking. By the time of the last Greenlanders, their diet was effectively devoid of milk and cheese. They were no longer farmers. They had become dependent on game, especially seal and walrus. One biological anthropologist wrote, "Rather than being pathologically inflexible about their diet, it seems the Greenland Vikings were trying to adapt. They were changing their eating habits. They were embracing marine foods. So why did the Greenland colonies ultimately fail? The answer isn't that they refused to eat food from the sea. They clearly did. The collapse was more complex. Climate change made life unbearable. Supply lines from Iceland and Norway broke down. The Black Death ravaged Europe and disrupted trade. But the story that Vikings died because they were too stubborn to change? That's a myth. The archaeological evidence shows they adapted as much as they could. Viking diet wasn't uniform across their world. In Denmark, farming was relatively successful. Danes had better access to grains, vegetables, and domesticated animals. In Norway and Sweden, coastal communities relied heavily on fishing. Inland communities hunted more. In Iceland, the environment was harsh. Dairy products, fish, and foraged foods dominated. In Greenland, the diet evolved from farming-based to hunting-based over centuries. Seasons dramatically influenced what Vikings ate. Spring brought fresh greens, wild plants, the first fish runs. Summer meant abundance. Vegetables ripened. Berries appeared. Hunting was easier. Fall was harvest time. Grains were gathered. Animals were slaughtered before winter. Preservation work intensified. Winter was survival mode. Dried fish, salted meat, fermented vegetables, stored grains, butter and cheese. Vikings became experts at pickling vegetables and fruit and curing meat to ensure they had enough food to last the cold months. There's a persistent myth that Viking food was bland and tasteless, but archaeological evidence suggests Viking cooks were fond of flavor-enhancing ingredients. Herbs were abundant. Dill, parsley, coriander. These weren't just garnishes. They were essential to making food palatable. Mustard seeds added heat. Juniper berries added complexity. Malt vinegar added acid. One expert stated clearly, "There's no reason to assume the food was bland or lacking in flavor." Dishes were often straightforward. But straightforward doesn't mean boring. Fresh fish, quality dairy, properly fermented vegetables, hearty grains. These ingredients have flavor when treated with care. Viking exploration and raiding depended on portable, preserved food. Dried fish was essential. Light, nutritious, long-lasting. Skyr was ideal for sea voyages. High in protein, didn't spoil quickly, could be stored in wooden containers. Dried meats, hardtack-style bread, ale or mead. These foods fueled journeys across the North Atlantic, to Iceland, to Greenland, to North America. Without advanced preservation techniques, Viking expansion would have been impossible. Today, nutritionists are rediscovering Viking food wisdom. The modern Nordic diet, based on traditional Scandinavian eating patterns, is considered one of the healthiest in the world. It emphasizes fish, whole grains, root vegetables, berries, fermented dairy. Sound familiar? These are exactly what Vikings ate 1,000 years ago. Research shows the Nordic diet reduces inflammation, supports heart health, and maintains healthy body weight. Vikings weren't following a trendy diet plan. They were eating what their environment provided, and accidentally, they created an optimal nutritional strategy. This ancient Viking food is now sold in supermarkets worldwide. It's marketed as Icelandic yogurt, though technically it's a cheese product. The traditional fermentation process is still used. Milk is heated, cooled, cultured with specific bacteria, then strained to remove whey. What results is thick, protein-rich, and remarkably similar to what Vikings ate in the year 1000. Athletes love it for its high protein content. Health-conscious consumers love it for its probiotic benefits. A food that helped Vikings survive harsh winters now helps modern people meet fitness goals. The circle is complete. Viking preservation methods never really died. Scandinavian countries still produce dried cod, stockfish, using techniques virtually unchanged since the Viking Age. Fermented fish dishes like Swedish surströmming and Norwegian rockfisk descend directly from Viking preservation practices. Smoking fish and meat remains popular across Nordic countries. Even pickling vegetables, essential for Viking winter survival, is a cornerstone of modern Scandinavian cuisine. These aren't nostalgic throwbacks. They're living traditions that connect modern Scandinavians to their Viking ancestors. Let's summarize the most surprising discoveries. Fact 1. Viking diet was heavily plant-based. not meat-heavy as portrayed in popular culture. Fact 2. Fish, not meat, was the cornerstone of their protein intake. Fact 3. Vikings consumed so much dairy that it changed their genetics, giving modern Scandinavians exceptional lactose tolerance. Fact 4. Their nutritional breakdown: 30 to 35% protein, 35 to 40% fats, 30% carbs, matches modern optimal performance diets. Fact 5. Greenland Vikings did adapt their diet to include seal and whale meat, contradicting the myth that they stubbornly refused to change. So what would an authentic Viking feast actually look like? Start with dried or smoked fish. Cod, herring, maybe salmon if you were wealthy. Add a hearty vegetable stew: cabbage, turnips, onions, peas, flavored with dill and mustard seeds. Serve barley porridge with a generous dollop of butter. Include fresh skyr for protein, maybe some roasted pork or horse meat if it's a special occasion. Barley beer to drink. Finish with wild berries and honey if available. No potatoes, no tomatoes, no elaborate sauces, just pure, nutrient-dense food that fueled exploration, conquest, and survival. The next time someone tells you Vikings were simple barbarians who just ate meat and drank mead, you'll know the truth. They were masters of nutrition, experts in preservation, and accidental creators of one of the healthiest diets in human history. Their food culture survived 1,000 years. It's alive today in skyr, in dried cod, in fermented vegetables, and in the Nordic diet that health experts praise. The Vikings knew something we're only now rediscovering. Eat local, waste nothing, preserve wisely, and let quality ingredients speak for themselves. Which historical food culture should we explore next? Ancient Rome? Medieval China? The Aztec Empire? Comment below and let me know. And if you found this surprising, you'll love our next video about the ancient food that was worth more than gold. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Remember, history isn't what we imagine. It's what the evidence reveals. And the evidence about Viking food? It's more fascinating than any legend.